I am speaking with American composer David Bernstein. He is in Portland, Oregon. I'm in Santa Barbara, as everybody knows, and we're going to speak about a little bit about well, just about what it is to be a composer in America, what his career has been, all that good stuff. But also his CD. It's from 2010 that I just reviewed on PerformingArtsReview.net. Late Autumn Moods and Images, and I think we'll get to this when I ask you a couple of these questions, David. But even the title exactly describes what is to be experienced. Moods and Images, Late Autumn. So, okay, so I love that,
Yes, well,
so that's the CD we're going to discuss a little bit, but kind of what you yourself said. I'm a Northwesterner, so we're going to brag a little bit about the Pacific Northwest. You are from Akron. How many years were you there at the University in Akron?
I was at the university for 28 years. I took an early retirement,
How sweet it
and
is.
and I moved down from there. I moved to Georgia. I had a brother who's a medical technician outside of Atlanta, and I was also interested in continuing to do some freelance commercial work because I had done that in the Cleveland, Akron area. So I was there for about 6 years, really didn't care for it very much, the heat, the humidity, and even though I'd lived in the South before, because I went to school in Florida for a long time, Florida State. So my older son happened to be out in Portland doing his medical residency at Oregon Health and Science University. So I came out to visit him, and very simply put, I fell in love with this area. I what between what I saw on the coast, the Oregon coast, and the mountains, the Mount Hood region, I just fell in love with this whole region. So we moved out here. What I didn't expect to find was just how wonderful the people are in this city. I really, really got into meeting people when I came out here. Because for many years I had been in the Cleveland area, a member of the Cleveland Composers Guild. When I came out here, I asked if there was a guild or some kind of composer organization I could join. There was none, so I helped to get one going. And our group is called Cascadia Composers. We now officially have 81 members, not just in the Portland region, but Seattle, along the California coast, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Southern Oregon. And we are one of 10 chapters, but we are by far the biggest chapter in this national, what they call NACUSA, National Association of Composers, USA. It's 10 chapters big, but we are the largest and the most active. We had a group that included me that went to Cuba last November. And we're pretty busy. We give 7 to 10 concerts a year.
Why didn't I
So
meet
all
you?
this,
Why
go
didn't
ahead.
I meet you about a year ago? I took a group of stalwart musicians, Emeriti Philharmonic, my first little summer trip to Cuba last July.
Oh, really?
And
That's wonderful.
as you know, the adventure is Cuba all by itself. It's an amazing,
Uh,
amazing place. Anyway. Well, so
there
you
was a
are,
group of 5 of us, yeah,
yeah,
and we had a wonderful time.
you sound like a happy camper in Portland, and the rains are good for us we solitude sorts, right?
Yes, absolutely, positively.
I've wanted to ask. I know composers, and I mentioned this before we kind of went on. I don't think I've ever asked anybody. It's as I mentioned. Was a clarinetist, became a conductor, but I saw somebody playing a
Yes, saw
clarinet.
that.
I wanted to learn the instrument. What is it that made you decide I'm going to be a composer? Was it when you were a kid, when you were in college? What was that?
No, I'm probably a little bit different than most. I did not start in music until I was about 21. Now, I used to play accordion. My mother bought me accordion lessons when I was around 14 or 15. I got very good at it, but I never took music seriously until one day my teacher, and this was in Boston, my teacher there gave me a 5 minute transcription arrangement of Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue. Now, up until that time, I was playing things like Carnival of Venice, Malagueña, a bunch of other type accordion things that are very popular and very well known. Many polkas, many waltzes. But that little piece of Gershwin, reduced from 15 or so minutes to 5 minutes, totally blew me away. And then, interestingly, I met a guy, young guy from England, not too long after that. And he put me onto the Beethoven Ninth Symphonies. So I have to really thank George Gershwin and Ludwig van for getting me into this as a career. But again, I had only played accordion. So when I went to the university and tried to get in as a composition major, because that's what I was interested in, they said no, couldn't do it. They let me do the one thing that I immediately found easy, and that was music theory. So they'd let me become a music theory major at the undergraduate level while I worked at composing. So yes, I started very, very late. I began piano lessons at about that age, 21 or so, and spent hours in a practice room knowing how far behind I was everybody else. So it's kind of frantic that way. But that led from a bachelor's degree into a master's degree, and this is all in Florida. And then I went and got a job in New York City for a while and decided, well, teaching high school or secondary school is not what appealed to me very much. So I decided to go and work on a doctorate. And that's when I went to Indiana University, one of the better moves I've made. And that was when I majored in composition. And that led to my job, competitive job, in Ohio, the University of Akron, which for 28 years for me was wonderful because we had a very strong applied music performance faculty, and I got to compose for almost every single one of them. So I got my stuff done and recorded well and was able to send it out to other places for performance, like New York or places in Europe, etc. And it was a great laboratory for me. I wound up writing works for orchestra, for band, for musical theater, and then I don't know how many different chamber combinations that I've written for. And so they kept me busy. It was challenging because when you're working a full-time job and you're head of the composition department, it's time consuming, it's very challenging, no time to get bored, nothing like that. And I had really, really good students for many, many years, along with my colleagues, the faculty. It was a wonderful place to be in because Cleveland, that region, has six schools of music, more or less, and it was a very intense area to live and work in. And being part of the Cleveland Composers Guild at the time was also part of it. So you had schools of music like the one I was involved with. You had other schools like Cleveland Institute of Music, Cleveland State University, Oberlin, Baldwin Wallace Conservatory, Kent State University. And the major thing up there, of course, was the Cleveland Orchestra. That was like my local band, and I used to go to them a lot. So it was a very inspiring place to be, and I was getting a lot of performances. And when I retired early and told people I was going to be leaving, you're getting everything done. Why do you want to leave? I said, I need something new. I need something different. Well, it turned out Georgia wasn't that, but certainly the West Coast. And this group, Cascadia Composers, has absolutely become that. So that was formed out here in 2008. We are this coming season going to be giving our 10th anniversary for the organization. We do, the guy mentioned, anywhere between 7 and 10 concerts a year. And we're a very active group of composers. There's quite a composition scene up here. There really is.
Guess who's going to be tipping you heavily for this large piece of PR for Cascade Composers? That was quite a monologue. Many, many thanks. So therefore, I think I'm ready to ask you this other question. I think I mentioned it in my review. What I love is composers who really know rhythm, how to use rhythm, how to excite a moment with rhythm, and then of course color. The use of color and tonality and so on. And I, if I may quote myself, rhythm and its changeability excite you. And that's the takeaway that I took from this late on CD. And also this business about, I use the word nuanced memory, and you mentioned it in your program notes, how I guess what I'm getting at is your very intelligent construction of pieces, your very deliberate use of things. For example, tunes that you refer to, you disguise, you come back to in certain of the pieces. This is the hard part, can you give us, people that are watching this, any kind of idea, what do you do, how does that whole thing happen? How do you organize a work of music like that?
Well, I think you instinctively picked up on what for me is a major factor that I think about, and that is the use of rhythm. Not pitch so much, but rhythm, or almost at the exclusion of other things. Rhythm and also craft, the craft of composition. When I was studying music, one person, well, more than one really, but one person just struck me all the time in terms of the amount of effort that he put into studying the craft of composition, and that was Johannes Brahms. I was always struck by the skill and the craft that he put into his music. It's very different than somebody like Beethoven, who had struck such an extraordinary intuitive aspect for creativity. And from one sonata form to another, it's like no two of them are really the same. Now, that would not be true with Brahms. He needed much more the security of the kind of forms that he used. But still, the craft of his composition has always affected me. And I picked up on that with a number of other composers. Probably first and foremost would really be Sebastian Bach. Wonderful influence on me. The counterpoint. I know a lot of other composers. I'm not really that interested in counterpoint these days, but I always have been. And that goes directly back to my love of Sebastian Bach. And whether it be Beethoven or Mozart or Brahms or Schoenberg or others, I've always been interested in counterpoint, and I still am, and that is reflected on the works in that CD of mine.
Absolutely, and I would have used, I think I used another word, but counterpoint in a way is the inner voicing. I think I used the word dense. Some of your textures and structures can be very, very dense, also very, very accessible and beautiful. Yes. And if I'm not misusing the word, counterpoint. If there's no counterpoint, there's no interest. How's that?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's something that's been a major factor in the way I think. And in terms of how I kind of create, well, with pitches, I really use very, very little. I admit I was very influenced with the kind of thing that you see with Arnold Schoenberg in his so-called free atonal period, the use of small groups of pitches. I tried once to actually use 12-tone procedures, probably every composer has. I couldn't do it because I couldn't hear it. But with small groupings of pitches, 3, 4, 5, that I could work with. That I could really get into my ear. And I could structure with every technique that I possibly know. And so that has served me down through the years, and it's hopefully helped to create a kind of a stylistic sound that I use in many of my compositions. So the pitch aspect is one thing. Rhythm is a free element, although when I do write, I am very conscious of texture, how I use texture. And by that I mean the relationship of one player to any other player at any given point of time. How far you go before you know something must change. And I've had a great teacher in this regard, and that is Beethoven. Nobody but him. The way he handles a sense of timing, his textual diversity, knowing when something must change. I've never seen any other composer's works that do it the way he does. He's been my greatest teacher, really.
This is the beauty of speaking with a living composer. I'm so glad you're alive, which is that.
Well, I guess I am too.
Everything I kind of describe in certain words, you have reconfirmed in just now about structure, densities, interesting sounds. You just took the words out of my mind. I remember listening to the CD recently about how the play, if you will, between instruments, it always is perfect. Everyone is given their opportunity. You know what I mean? I think you indicated anyway.
Oh
You're
yeah.
very careful about that, uh, and colors and moods, as we said before. You mentioned. I think it's a good time to talk about two pieces on the CD in particular. It's a wonderful overview of your work, of your of your moods, of your character, of your
Thank you.
insight.
Yeah.
But let's look at, because you mentioned Schoenberg, and I wonder if, correct me if I'm all wet, but I immediately thought of six sound sculptures, the piece for clarinet and piano,
Oh,
because it's
yes.
very pointillistic. It might be kind of a word, but your careful use of, well, it's okay, your careful use of very few notes. Can you just give us a little idea of six sound sculptures for clarinet and piano, and remind us who the players are if you can remember while I look.
Yeah, the players were Barbara Halmer and Susan DeWitt Smith, and they did a wonderful job for me. And in writing those movements to that particular piece, I was thinking, first of all, okay, I'm not going to write just one movement. I'm going to do six. So there has to be a certain kind of pacing and a variety because I'm very conscious of how an audience is going to be sit there and listening. And my great fear, I'll tell you this right up front, my great fear in writing a piece and then having it exposed before an audience is boring them. I don't ever want to bore an audience. Now, how do I know? When I do or when I don't know. But at least I'm consciously aware that that terrifies me. So that comes down to the textural aspect of variety there. Small groupings of pitches for unity, but the variety through the rhythm and the variety through the texture. So from one movement to another, I try and carefully balance the moods, the pacing, the speed, the tempos, what I do with the instruments vis-a-vis each other. And when the clarinet, for example, in a work like that is going to have a much more virtuosic type of passage versus when the piano will come to the fore. And another thing I'm very conscious of is that when in the past, as well as in this piece, if I write a duet, it's or something like with piano and other instruments, it's never going to be using an instrument like the piano as an accompaniment. I always treat them both equally because I think for the integrity of the individual player, they're going to want their own thing. They're going to want to work well with another person or another instrument or singer, whatever it might be. But there's going to be an equality. I have always been very conscious of trying to do that. Whether I've succeeded or not, that's for others to say. But at least it's been a conscious thing on my part to do.
Thank you, and
Because I'm thinking,
you're
I
way
was just
ahead of.
thinking that,
Go ahead. Sorry.
well, if I was one of the performers, how would I want to be treated by the composer? I would want to be given a part that appealed to me. If I was a bassoonist, I'd want to have something that my instrument could really say that that composer gave to me. So I'm thinking that way, and pretty much all the time.
And
Writing a
I've been watching this. What we're talking about just now for many years now, since I was a kid. Collaborative music making.
yes,
And when I was a kid, when we were younger, the piano part, even maybe, but the pianist was kind of thought of as, I don't know, an accompanist, which is not accurate. Collaboration, two equal partners in making music together. So may I congratulate you
very much
on that.
so.
And also, this was such an economy, the six sound sculptures, such an economy of sound and structure and organization and art. And now I'm going to try and keep the time down here a little bit. I want to speak about one other piece simply because the instrumentation is so interesting. Quadrilogues 2. This is for flute, oboe, percussion, and piano. Can you give us a little story about that piece, please?
Well, I that work was written for four people that I knew. See, here we come down to writing pieces directly for faculty members that I worked with. So I knew all the people, and I had heard them play in other situations. This piece was kind of different because this is not a frequently found combination of instruments. So I wanted to try something like this, and it fit into the series of piano quartets that I started writing. The very first one, Quadrilogues 1, was scored, a bit unusual, I think. It was scored for a trumpet, a clarinet, a cello, and a piano. All right, the second one was this one for flute, one percussionist. What was the other one? Oboe and piano. And the third one was also on the CD for a more traditional 19th century ensemble, the strings and the piano. And I finished one a couple of years ago, a fourth piano quartet, but this one included voice, percussion, flute, and piano. So I'm very interested in doing these kinds of things, different collaborations that way, using just 4 people. The one with voice is a little bit different because, of course, a text was involved. But going back to Quadrilogues 2, the instruments were so different that was a very appealing factor for me. The flute versus the oboe versus whatever I might do with the percussion. The piano is a given kind of thing in a way, but I love working with the piano. And now because I came to it so late, I would not consider myself really a performing pianist. But I love writing for it, and I love writing for it in a combination with other instruments, and with instruments that will change from one piano quartet to another. So that had a great deal of appeal to me. And again, I knew the players, and I wanted to write something that would appeal to them. I have had quite a few performances of this particular work. And I just love the color variety. I was really so struck by that aspect of it. Whereas when I went to the next piano quartet that involved a violin with a viola with a cello, that's a totally different thing, expressing a totally different kind of mood throughout than Quadrilogues 2. Because there's so much of a melting of what the string color can bring, and they work generally in a very different way than something like a flute, an oboe, and a percussion would work with the piano. But I like to try these challenges and to try different things that way. I'm doing that right now on a new piece, so I'm hoping that's going to be
I was just going to
interesting.
ask.
I hope.
Come on, tell us. What's going on now? What's happening?
Well, I've taken on a challenge of writing a work that will involve 2 people, one of whom will do flute, the C flute, a piccolo, and an alto flute, not at the same time, but it'll be a multi-movement piece. And the other player will be a single percussionist. And in that regard, that percussionist is going to have quite a bit to do with a variety of different drums. And I've never really done that before. I've done some large percussion pieces, which did, of course, involve drums, but not in this context of 2 people, again, and a variety of drums. Now, the percussionist will also use a vibraphone and a xylophone, possibly a glockenspiel, and some other small supplemental type instruments like triangle. So this is in a way kind of new for me, and I'm going to see if I can put together 5 movements for 2 really strong performers here.
And what you're writing
I did do a piece.
What you're writing is a piece for 15 players.
Yeah, well, yes, condensed to 2, condensed down to 2 human beings, and we'll see how that goes.
And what a panoply of color! What an amazing variety.
That would indeed be. Yes. Yes.
Well,
I did write one. Well, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think we've about extended our courtesy in terms of people's attention span. So it's time to shut her down. I want to remind everybody that my review of Late Autumn Moods and Images, a CD produced in 2010, the chamber music of David Bernstein, who is now living happily in Portland. Go to the website performingartsreview.net, have a look at the review, and you can order the album. You can listen to an excerpt and so on, and you'll be seeing this interview there as well. So, David, many thanks for the time. I'm glad we worked out our earlier problems. Great pleasure. Great pleasure.
Thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate it.
Good.
Very, very much.
Okay.